Hello, and welcome to our next installment of our Together Apart worship series. Today we will be celebrating and worshiping Palm Sunday. Usually in the Wolcott Congregational Church, we celebrate Palm Sunday through the singing of a cantata. But unfortunately, we are unable to do that this year right now because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the social distancing and stay-at-home orders that it requires. Because normally we because art and music is so important to us on this worship today, I thought that we would try out something special for our sermon. So for the rest of this sermon, you will still hear my voice, but instead of there being a video of just my face and the wonderful dragon painting and behind me, I'll be playing a slideshow of a number of different Palm Sunday themed art pieces that I found from all over the internet. I spent a little bit of time putting the names and artists on them, so you can, so they're properly attributed. They should all be in the public domain, though. I'm looking forward to hearing about which one of these is your favorite. I had a lot of fun compiling it. I hope you have a lot of fun looking at them. I hope they give you a different perspective about what Palm Sunday means as we worship together. And without further ado, thank you, and I'll see you soon. Palm Sunday seems almost to taunt us this year because of the rules of social distancing and isolation that we're facing. It certainly made me consider this story, so familiar to us through our tellings and retellings of Holy Week Bible readings and plays, in a whole new light. That we can't physically be like the crowds welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem is painful. Many churches, like our own, have Palm Sunday rites, rituals, and celebrations that are almost as sacred as the story we're telling. At our own church, there is of course the Palm Sunday cantata, beloved for the hard work the cantata choir and our music director and organist Alice Caro put in every year, almost as much as for the music itself. In the last church I served, every Palm Sunday, we rented a donkey and we dressed the kids, and some adults, up in costume. We had a short pageant, and everybody reenacted in body and song the Palm Sunday processional. We waved our palms as we paraded and marched and sung songs of hope and faith. But they won't be doing that this year, at least in body. None of us will. That we cannot gather in body is a reminder not only of the many thousands who have died in this country and around the world, and who will die in the weeks ahead, but also the very real grief and trauma we've experienced as life has been put on hold. And I think it's good for us to acknowledge the losses that even the healthy among us have faced and will continue to face. Palm Sunday begins our Holy Week together, and if nothing else, this year is a reminder that a large part of our Christian story is a confrontation with death in the midst of life. Palm Sunday is the beginning of that particular journey. Our gospel text today is the 11th chapter of Mark. If you've been paying attention at home, you might realize that this is actually before our last 3 weeks of story. So this story takes place before the cleansing of the temple, before the apocalyptic messages that we talked about last week. But this Palm Sunday story, which seems so quaint in light of what is to come, has some interesting undercurrents and side stories in it. In recent years, scholars and pastors have focused our interpretive efforts of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem on the political context of Jesus' entry and what it would have meant to regular people. I think from the text itself, there's clearly some political or quasi-political aspect to this event. The cry of the people, after all, is blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Even the traditional Christian name for the events of Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry, would have had political meanings to them. The Roman Empire was particularly known for their triumphs, grand parades in which victorious and conquering Roman generals and emperors wore a crown of laurels and were cheered on by a surging populace. Indeed, one day, if you ever find yourself in Rome, you can see a triumphal column dedicated to the victories of the Emperor Trajan. Such a general or emperor would ride into town through the main city gates on their magnificent war-trained stallion, decked with armor and looking larger than life. They would have made a general holiday of celebration of it, giving out bread to win the favor of the populace, along with columns of heavily armed and armored soldiers, magnificent in splendor and in terror. Compare this, then, with what Jesus does. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a colt, a young horse who has never been ridden, who is not suitable or trained for war. He proclaims no earthly empire, no conquest of faraway places. There are no soldiers with glistening shields and armor. It is just him and his disciples, joining with the people in hymns of praise. Jesus does not trample under his boots tribes and nations, but war, famine, hunger, disease, and sin. He does not give out bread to appease the masses, but is the bread of life himself, to reconcile divinity and humanity. The people are spontaneously celebrating not military conquest, but life itself, free from the burdens and weight of sin and death. They are imagining and participating in a vision of the world in which Jesus is Lord, and what he stood for was triumphant. This moment of exultation and shared vision makes the events of Good Friday all the more heartbreaking. Because just when Jesus' vision appears to be ready to light the world on fire, it also appears to be snuffed out. It appears that the dream is over. It appears that death and brutality have won out over life and compassion. So it appears. But we Christians know that the events of Good Friday are not the end of the story, but an end in the story, which gives rise to the new beginning, the new creation and Christ's resurrection, one which we still live in the midst of. So although we cannot celebrate Palm Sunday together this year, we are still united in Christ's love with one another and with our God, a God who saves. I will leave us with this story, which I hope you find as inspiring as I have. You may have even heard it before, but I hope we can see it in a new way, that way of Palm Sunday. When I was 10 years old, I got to go to Spain to visit my brother who was studying abroad there. We went during Holy Week, Semana Santa, and I remember vividly the processionals. In small towns and big cities, charitable fraternal groups, comparable to the Elks or to the Masons, process with beautifully hand-carved statues of Jesus and Mary through the streets and town centers at twilight, with rose petals littered on the ground. People crowd the narrow streets and on the famous balconies of Spain with candles in hand, a sea of lights as far as the eye can see. This year, there are no grand parades with large and beautiful statues in Spain. But something else equally beautiful is happening. A former professor of mine, Reverend Dr. Mary Ludi, is in Sevilla, the heartland of those festivals, right now. And she reports that there's a new sort of processional. When the shift changes happen, at around 8 p.m., the church bells begin to ring, and they cheer the healthcare workers going home from the essential work that they do at the hospitals, clinics, and nursing homes, caring for the sick and dying. I understand that something like this is happening in Wolcott and all across Connecticut the nation, and the world. So even if we can't be together this year in person, celebrating Palm Sunday as Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, many of us are celebrating those who are doing holy and essential work in much the same way that those folks did for Jesus so many thousands of years ago. Amen.